Hi guys, it's Caroline, and today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different video than my usual. You may or may not know this, but in May of 2020, I graduated from Harvard with a concentration in English and a secondary in economics. Now, that just means a major and a minor, and I got an honors degree, and I just thought it would be interesting to kind of go through and talk about the classes that I took at Harvard with a specific focus on the ones that dealt with literature. Not all of them were in the English department, some were in different departments, and I'll still briefly talk about the ones that, didn't have anything to do with books because I did have gen eds and also economics classes, but I really wanted to mainly focus on the ones that dealt with literature and my favorite books that were a part of those classes. This whole video is just going to be my freshman year. So to start off, my freshman fall was really exciting. I had decided that instead of really taking English classes, I wanted to get as many gen eds out of the way, but I also wanted to find gen eds that somehow had to do with literature. There's this thing called shopping week. So the first week of classes, no one's actually signed up for anything. You basically just go to whatever classes you think might be interesting, and by the end of the week, you submit the 4 or 5 that you decide you're going to take that week. Shopping week is really hectic. I think I was probably shopping about 8 classes. Some people shop 5, know exactly what they're going for, and pick 4 of the 5. And some people, like my roommate, she always had 15 classes that she would go to. Let's get right into it. So I was a crazy girl, and I decided to cross-register my first semester in a class that was taught at Harvard Divinity School. So what that means is even though I was an undergraduate, I was able to take a class that was part of a divinity school, which is a graduate school and also a graduate school that actually tends to have a lot of older people in it. So this was a class that fulfilled sort of my cultural requirement, and it was called Back Roads to Far Places. The idea being that they were all narratives about journeys and they all had to do with religions. And I'm in this class with monks and ministers and also just 35-year-olds who really know their stuff. You would think it would all be super strict, but it wasn't just all Christian texts. There were texts from religions all around the world. And actually my favorite book from that class was The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And you might be thinking, what religion is in that? And I think the religion in that is the fact that there's really no religion and it's very bleak. I thought it was such a moving, heart-wrenching book. And I just remember feeling so amazed that a book that I could be in a class that I thought was really highfalutin and cool and just really prestigious. And yet we were reading a book that I felt I would just go into Barnes & Noble and it would be on a shelf. And so that to me was really cool because that class we also read things like Gilgamesh, just really typical journey narrative stuff. And then we were reading stuff like The Road. So I just found that to be really interesting. And that book still resonates with me. I want to reread it despite the fact that it is so bleak. So the next class that I took was a freshman seminar, and these were special because they were all capped at 12 students and you could only take them as a freshman. They were pass-fail and they tended to be taught by senior faculty, and it was a way to get introduced with them. So I took one called Faith and Fiction in America, and I loved it. First of all, there was only 4 of us in that class, which was really cool, and I think it was because we read a book a week. Now it was pass-fail, so sometimes other people in the class didn't read the whole book or just skipped it. I was pretty faithful and read every single book every single week, and it was really good because it was taught by a divinity school professor. So here I am, not this religious person, but my freshman fall, I did take 2 classes taught by divinity school people, and we read books that took place chronologically in America, from the really beginning of it being colonized up to today. And each one sort of looked at a religious aspect of America, whether it was Calvinism or the introduction of religion at the beginning of America, or just what religion was in the 1950s for Jewish people, or just whatever. And so I found that that was really interesting. I learned a lot about the religious history of the United States through these snapshots that the books gave us. And the one book that I think sticks with me most would be Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. And I had never read any O'Connor before, and I think it was a really great introduction and kind of made me realize how powerful some of these books that I kind of shoved off as classics, they're too stuffy, but were also books that tended not to be the classics you need to read, that I just realized that those are books that I could totally just read on my own and absolutely enjoy. It was kind of like racy, I felt, for a book that I was reading for a class, and it just felt very adult, and it made me realize, like, I'm in the big leagues now. Like, I'm not in high school anymore where we have to like cover our hands and like pretend the sex scene didn't happen in the book, or like avoid books that were a little bit too mature. We could actually just talk about those things like mature adults, and like this professor really actually respected our opinions. And when we had these discussions, I mean, there really were like 4 of us, and like me and 4 other people, one of them being the professor, for like 3 hours just talking about books and what we thought about a book. And it was awesome. He even took us on a trip to Walden Pond because each one got like a stipend, and normally you just get like one big food day because there's 12 people, but because there's only a few of us, like he used the stipend to rent a car and take us to Walden Pond, and we had like lunch and a picnic and walk through the graves, like a graveyard that had a bunch of famous like literary celebrities like buried in it. And it was a very awesome class. And I will really quickly go through the 2 other classes that I took my freshman fall. One of them was Understanding Darwinism, taught by a professor who is one of the leading evolutionary biologists, and he was awesome. I actually had a really great experience with him because for our final paper, I had no idea what to write. And as a freshman, I didn't realize most people didn't go to the professor for advice. They went to their TF, because the TF was the grad student who was actually going to grade your paper. And so it looked better to go to them and just figure out what they wanted. So I went to the professor not realizing that he's not grading it, and no one was at his office hours. Like no one, he was kind of intimidating, although he was really funny and really nice. And we just sat and talked for about an hour. He asked me about myself, and he was like, great, study English. I feel like not enough people get involved in the arts, and I think it's so important that people like actually do stuff in the humanities. And it made me feel so good that like one of the world's leading biologists was like looking me in the eye and was like, you go girl, you study English. And I feel like that has stayed with me for years, like absolute years. And that was really important to me, like early on, to have an adult figure tell that to me. And then we figured out what I was going to write on, and he handed me a book off of his shelf. He said, use this for your research. So when I get home, I open the flap, and first of all, the book wasn't out yet. So he had given me basically like an advanced copy, and it was signed by the author that was like, thanks so much for mentoring me at Oxford. Yeah, so I just thought that was awesome. And then the last class I took was Spanish 11, which was the like second tier of Spanish. So it's like beginner, like the second level of beginner Spanish, which I'm terrible at languages. So that was just like a rough go of it, but we won't talk about it. Next up is my freshman spring. Now, freshman spring, I just went all in on the gen eds. So I took Math 21A, which was Calc 3, and part of it was because I knew I really wanted to study English, and I pretty much knew I wanted to work in publishing, but I thought, hey, what if I studied math and I was actually like good at it? I was good at it in high school, and maybe this is like a better career path for me. So I took Calc 3, and I actually hated it. I hated it so much. I got a B+, which made me mad by only like a little bit, and I worked my butt off. But it did lead to a job in teaching Calc 2, which I did for the 3 remaining years of my undergrad, which was actually a really great gig. And yeah, so I don't regret taking that math class. The next class I took was Spanish 20, which is like the 3rd level of Spanish, the first kind of intermediate Spanish class. And like it happened, we don't need to talk about it. Then I took a class called XPOS 20. Now, every freshman at Harvard is required to take a class called XPOS, and it is a freshman writing course. The really nice thing about it is there are tons of different options on what kind of XPOS you're allowed to take. So I had friends who took one on like cooking, law, or like immigration rights, or environmental stuff. Basically, you could think of any topic, and someone was probably teaching an XPOS class. These were small classes of up to 15 or so people, and I was placed in the Shakespeare XPOS, which I had ranked as like my 2nd or 3rd choice, not realizing that it was notoriously the most work out of all the XPOS. So all XPOS is you have to write 3 papers. I did not realize that this class had a lot of background stuff because it was on Shakespeare. So for each and every of the 3 papers, we had to read a Shakespeare play, which you're like, they're not that long. Okay, but for the comparative one, we had to watch the entire 1st season of House of Cards, which like, that's 10 hours. And it seems cool, oh, I'm gonna watch stuff for my class, but wait until you're on Sunday and you have to tell your friends I can't go to brunch because I have 8 more episodes of House of Cards to get through in the next 48 hours. I really loved the Shakespeare plays. I'm a Shakespeare person, but my favorite thing that I read during that time was Vinegar Girl by Anne Tyler, which is a retelling with the Hogarth Shakespeare series of A Taming of the Shrew. And I really appreciated it. I wrote my final essay as a research essay on that kind of looked at the different attitudes of feminism between the original Shakespeare play, 10 Things I Hate About You, and also Vinegar Girl. It was like the first real like research paper I had ever written, particularly for a college class. It was really daunting, but I feel like it was really worthwhile, partially because then my sophomore year, that teacher reached out to me and he said, I think you should submit this paper for this specific Shakespeare conference. And I did. And I went to this conference as a sophomore and presented this paper, which of course, like reading it a year later, having been a better essay writer was like horrifying. I was like, I can't believe I have to speak. But it was such a weird experience, and I get to say I like presented at a conference on Shakespeare, which makes me sound fancy, but really it was wild. So first of all, the other guy from Harvard who went with me ended up winning the grand prize for everything, and on the 2-hour ride back, I had to sit next to this man knowing that my thing was garbage and his was like elite. And then the girl who presented before me also did something on The Taming of the Shrew, and I think she was the only person to do so, but hers was all about how it was secretly like referencing BDSM, and so she would be like, this word means this in BDSM, and would show pictures, and it was clearly her because it had all her tattoos and stuff, but she had like blurred out her face, and it was her in all these like compromising positions, fully clothed, but compromising positions, and she was like, this is what pegging means in BDSM, this is what, and so she was like, so when he says this, then he's really referring to what I was like, Shakespeare's time, like, they didn't know the lingo. They didn't know the BDSM lingo. So, like, you can't say Shakespeare was trying to... It didn't make sense. I'm glad I did it, even though it was, like, so whack. Also, I took that class with Malia Obama's boyfriend, and we did, like, a little group project together, and he's very nice. So then the rest of the, like, year, he kind of would wave to me, which, you know... celebrity adjacent, you know, you always have to have a few of those stories as a Harvard grad. This class was called The American Novel, and it was taught by Philip Fisher, who is like a bigwig. He's a big deal. And one of the cool things about Waiting by Ha Jin was actually that Philip Fisher himself taught the author. And I don't remember exactly in what capacity, but he had, like, Ha Jin had been a student of Philip Fisher at one point before he wrote this novel. So while he's, like, giving lectures on this novel, he's also giving us insight into this author as a young, like, academic, which I found really fascinating. And again, I was charmed by the, like, celebrity adjacent literary whatever. And this was actually a really good book. I also really appreciated how that class, despite the fact that it was called The American Novel and it like had Hemingway and Faulkner and books like that, which I hate Faulkner, by the way, just wanted to say, books like that, that this syllabus made room for a book that was not set on American soil really at all. And I do believe that the author is like Chinese American, so it is written by an American author, and so I really appreciated that this course that really had the ability to just go full throttle into the stuffy white men gave some like breathing room to someone who wasn't just like Ernest Hemingway, and also a book that was not like predominantly like set in America as well. Okay guys, so those are the classes that I took my freshman year. Stay tuned because I will be doing a video for each and every year that I went to college. Let me know down below what your favorite class in college was and what the favorite book you ever read in college was. All right, hope you enjoyed. Bye.